The detail that stopped him was the scarf. A pale yellow silk scarf tied around the wrist of the woman pushing the food cart, and he had bought that scarf at a market in Lyon 4 years ago, because she said it was the color of early morning. Fletcher Crane had not planned to look twice. He was walking through the east corridor of St. Carleton Medical Centre, half listening to his contact talk about the new cardiac wing, when the cart rattled past. The scarf caught the overhead light for 1 second, just one. His feet stopped moving before his mind caught up. The woman had her back to him. Gray food service uniform. Dark hair pinned up under a hairnet. She was pushing the cart slowly, one hand pressed against her lower back, and when she leaned forward to adjust a tray he saw the swell of her belly beneath the uniform. Pregnant, 7 or 8 months at least. Fletcher's briefcase hit the floor. He didn't hear it land. He didn't hear his contact say his name, didn't hear the low hum of the ventilation overhead, or the soft chime of the elevator at the end of the hall. He only heard the sound his own breathing made when the woman straightened, turned, and looked directly at him. Meredith Crane, his missing wife, standing 10 feet away in a hospital food service uniform, 7 months pregnant, alive. For 7 months, Fletcher Crane had been a man walking through the shape of his own life. He had signed contracts, taken calls, sat through board meetings in glass towers overlooking Burrard Inlet, and told people he was managing. He was not managing. He was performing the act of a man who was managing, and doing it well enough that most people were convinced. The morning she disappeared, he had left the house on Mackenzie Drive before 6. Meredith had been at the kitchen table in her blue cardigan, both hands wrapped around a mug of tea, watching the window. She hadn't looked tired exactly. She had looked like someone waiting for something she wasn't sure would arrive. He had kissed the top of her head, not her cheek, not her mouth, the top of her head, the way you greet someone you think will be there when you come back. "I'll be late tonight," he had said. She had nodded, nothing else. By the time he pulled into the underground parkade at Crane Capital that morning, he had already forgotten the way she'd looked at the window. There was a funding issue in Kelowna and a zoning dispute in North Van, and his assistant had double-booked 2 things that should never have been in the same calendar week. He had moved through the day like a man with purpose, which is to say, he had moved through it without thinking. He came home to an empty house. Her coat was still on the hook by the door. Her reading glasses were still on the arm of the couch. The book she'd been reading, a battered paperback he'd never gotten around to asking about, sat face down on the coffee table, like she'd meant to come back and finish the chapter. She had not taken her car, she had not packed a bag, her passport was still in the drawer of the bedside table. What she had taken, her phone, her wallet, the emergency cash from the inside pocket of her winter coat, that coat was still on the hook, which meant she'd left with almost nothing. Fletcher had called her cell 12 times before midnight, straight to voicemail every time. By morning the number was dead. His mother, Gloria Crane, arrived the following afternoon. She'd come not with worry but with something that looked, from a distance, like it. Close up it was something else, something more organized. She wasn't ready for this life, Gloria said, sitting across from him in the kitchen with her hands folded in her lap. "I told you that before the wedding. Some women simply aren't built for it." Fletcher had not answered. He'd been too tired to argue and too frightened to think clearly. The private investigator found nothing traceable. No credit card activity, no cell signal, no hotel booking, no flight out of YVR or YJ. It was as though Meredith had stepped off the edge of a map and the edge had sealed behind her. Then came the slow, quiet drift. His mother began appearing at the house more often. She reorganized things, subtly, the way she had always reorganized things, with justifications just reasonable enough to make you feel foolish for objecting. A friend of hers, Anthea Bassett, recently divorced and watchful in the way of women who have decided watchfulness is a skill, began appearing at the same charity functions Fletcher was expected to attend. Anthea never pushed. That was her particular skill. She offered proximity and sympathy in careful measures, and Fletcher, who was exhausted and grieving and too proud to admit either, let himself be placed where other people positioned him. He had not stopped loving Meredith. He had tried once to stop searching. It hadn't worked. But he had stopped believing she was coming back, and that was a different kind of surrender, quieter and in some ways worse. And now, she was here. Anthea Bassett saw it happen. She had been standing a step behind Fletcher, waiting for him to finish talking to someone whose name she had already forgotten. When she watched his face change, she followed his eye line down the corridor, and when she understood what she was looking at, something rearranged itself behind her expression. She moved forward before Fletcher did. "Well," she said, her voice smooth, her heels clicking against the linoleum, "this is unexpected." Meredith had turned back to her cart. Her hands were on the handles. She did not look up. Anthea stopped 3 feet from her, close enough that the other woman couldn't pretend not to notice. Meredith, she said, not a greeting, a demonstration. Two nurses slowed near the nursing station. A man with a clipboard paused near the water fountain. Nobody looked away. Meredith straightened. Her face was controlled, the way a face gets when it's had a long time to practice being controlled. I'm working, she said quietly. Anthea looked at the food cart, at the hairnet, at the uniform pulling tight across her belly. Yes, she said, I can see that. The two words held a full conversation Anthea had rehearsed long before this moment. Fletcher stepped forward. Anthea. She didn't turn. It's all right, Fletcher, I'm just saying hello. But it wasn't hello. It was a measuring of distance between where Meredith Crane had been and where she was now. Done in public in front of witnesses, so that the measurement couldn't be denied later. You know, Anthea said, tilting her head slightly. I wondered where you'd gone. I suppose you've answered that. Meredith did not move her eyes from the cart handle. 7 months, Anthea continued, her voice lowering just enough to carry the illusion of discretion. Not a word, not a call, and here you are pushing a food trolley in a hospital corridor. She looked at Meredith's belly. With that. That's enough. Fletcher's voice was flat. Anthea turned to him, her expression calibrated to wounded reasonableness. I'm only saying what everyone here is thinking. No, the word was not loud. It didn't need to be. You're being cruel and I won't stand here while you do it. Something flickered through Anthea Bassett's face. Surprise first, then recalculation, then the smooth surface returning. She looked from Fletcher to Meredith and back again, assessing the math of the situation. She abandoned you, Anthea said, softer now, an appeal rather than an attack. You don't know what she did. Anthea stepped closer to him. I know what you look like for 7 months, Fletcher. I know what that cost you. Fletcher looked at his wife, at the hairnet, at the hand still gripping the cart, at the yellow silk scarf tied at her wrist, pale as early morning. She is my wife, he said. The corridor went still. Meredith's grip on the cart tightened. She did not look up, but her shoulders changed. Some long-held angle in them shifted, fractionally, like a door that had been nailed shut finally registering that someone had knocked. Anthea stepped back, the mask returned, smooth, unbothered, finished. When she does it again, she said, her voice quiet and controlled, don't tell me I didn't warn you. She turned and walked the length of the corridor without looking back. Her footsteps were precise and even, right up until the stairwell door swung shut behind her, and the sound stopped. Fletcher stood in the silence. She left behind and looked at his wife. Meredith still hadn't moved. One hand was on the cart. The other had come up to rest against her belly, low and careful, the way a hand reaches for something it has been protecting for a long time. Meredith, her name, just that. She shook her head, small, precise. Don't. A charge nurse appeared at the far end of the corridor, clipboard in hand, expression professionally blank. Mrs. Kohler, she said. You're welcome to take your break if you need one. Meredith nodded without speaking and began moving the cart toward the service corridor. Fletcher followed, not close, not fast, just enough to not lose her again. The service corridor was everything the main halls were not. Scuffed gray linoleum, fluorescent lighting that left nowhere to hide. A shelf of folded linen and cleaning supplies arranged by someone who had needed something to organize. A break room at the far end, 2 chairs, a table, a coffee maker that had been on too long, a window looking out onto the loading dock. Meredith lowered herself into a chair. The moment she sat, something in her released. Not collapse, not relief exactly, but the setting down of effort she had been spending all evening on simply standing upright. Fletcher stopped in the doorway. Can I come in? He asked. She looked at the question like it was an unfamiliar object, as if no one had asked permission of her in a very long time. Yes, she said, after a moment. He sat in the chair across from her. He kept his hands visible on the table open. She noticed, he could tell by the way her breathing changed. Not relief, but registration. He was trying, that was all he had. I'm not going to ask you to explain yourself, he said. Not yet, I just need to know you're all right. Meredith looked at her hands. They were rough, red at the knuckles. A small cut along the side of her right index finger, the kind that comes from hours of handling food service trays. She noticed him looking and tucked them under the table. I'm fine, she said. The words came out practiced too fast. He recognized their shape. Words a person says when saying anything else has become dangerous. You had pain earlier, he said, in the corridor. It passed. You're 7.5 months pregnant. I know exactly how far along I am, Fletcher. She looked up then. Her eyes were tired red at the edges but steady. I've been counting every week myself. The sentence landed with a weight he hadn't expected. Counting every week, alone. What did my mother say to you? He asked. Meredith was quiet for a long time. Then, she came the morning you left. Fletcher felt the air in the room change. You were barely out of the driveway, she said. She had a key, she didn't knock. A pause. She never knocked. His hands closed on the edge of the table. She'd been going through the recycling, Meredith continued. Her voice was steady but thin, the way voices get when they've recited something painful enough times that the emotion has been replaced by precision. I don't know when she started. Sometime in the previous weeks. She found the pregnancy test box. She paused. She held it up and she said, "This ends now." Fletcher stared at her. She said she had a contact at the licensing board. Before we were married, there was a complaint filed against me at the school where I worked. A parent who later admitted she'd misunderstood a situation, and the investigation was completely cleared. The record is expunged. It doesn't exist anywhere official. Meredith looked at the coffee maker. She said she still had the original file, that she knew people at the school board and at family court, that no judge would look at an accusation like that and still award primary custody to the mother. She drew a slow breath. She said it with her coat still on, like she'd planned to be there for exactly 5 minutes. Meredith. She said no grandchild of hers would be raised by a woman whose character was already in question. Her mouth tightened. Those were her exact words. And I stood in that kitchen and I thought about calling you. She paused. I had your number on the screen. And then I thought about what would actually happen. Whether you'd believe me before you called her. Whether she'd answer first. Whether by the time I'd said 3 sentences, you'd already be asking if I was sure I hadn't misunderstood her. If maybe she'd only meant. She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Because Fletcher knew. He sat across from his wife in a hospital break room under fluorescent light that made everything look older and more honest than it was. And he knew exactly how that conversation would have gone. He had had variations of it across the length of their marriage. Gloria doesn't mean it that way. She's protective. She grew up differently. Let's not make this into something. He had handed his mother those words. Every time he said them, he'd handed her a key to another room. I didn't take anything, Meredith said. No bank cards, nothing with your name connected to it. I took the cash from the kitchen drawer, $340, and I walked to the SkyTrain. You were pregnant, and you walked. I was 6 weeks along. I didn't know yet that I'd be doing this for 7 months. Her voice didn't shake. That was the worst part, how little it shook. I thought I'd be gone 2 or 3 weeks, enough to find a legal aid clinic, talk to someone, figure out if what she was threatening was real or just leverage. Fletcher lowered his head. It was real, she said. The contact at the licensing board, she actually had one. I spent 6 weeks verifying that. And by then I'd moved twice. I was showing, and every legal aid clinic had a 6-week wait list, and I had to decide. Go back with nothing and hope you'd believe me, or stay and build something I could actually use. She reached into the pocket of her uniform, and set a folded envelope on the table between them. I found a lawyer, she said. Tamsin Brooke, Family Law, New Westminster. I met her at a community clinic in Burnaby 3 months ago. She worked with me on intake while I saved for the retainer. She pushed the envelope slightly forward. I have pay stubs. I have letters from 2 women at the rooming house in East Van. I have a statement from the charge nurse here about my employment record. I have a letter from a legal records office, confirming the original complaint was dismissed and expunged. She paused. And 2 weeks ago I got a written statement from the woman who filed it. She apologized. She said your mother had contacted her first. The fluorescent light buzzed. Before we were even engaged, Meredith said. Your mother reached out to this woman I hadn't spoken to in 6 years and made contact. She was building this before we were married, Fletcher. Just in case she ever needed it. He sat without speaking for a long time. I was 11 days away, Meredith said. From having enough for Tamsin to file. From coming back with something real in my hands instead of just my word. She looked at the envelope, and then you walked into this corridor. Fletcher picked up the envelope carefully, the way you handle something that survived things it shouldn't have had to. A business card. A cover letter with Meredith's handwriting in the margins, dates, reference numbers, a notation in blue pen, retainer, $400 remaining. You did all of this, he said. I had to. No bitterness, just fact. He set the envelope back on the table. Then he opened his phone. Who are you calling? Meredith asked. My doctor, Preet Anand. He'll come here or wherever you want. I'm not taking you anywhere you don't choose. He held her eyes. You can say no. She looked at him for a long moment, then at the envelope, then at the yellow scarf at her wrist. All right, she said. The call was short and direct. Dr. Anand asked 4 questions and gave 1 answer. He'd be there in 30 minutes. When Fletcher hung up, he made a second call. His property manager. Victor, he said. I need every lock changed at the Mackenzie Drive house tonight. Every access code cleared. Every key fob reset. A pause. No. Tonight. Send whoever you have. Another pause. My mother is not to receive new credentials. If she contacts you, you have no information for her. He ended the call. Meredith had gone very still. He sent 3 texts after that, each one short. When he set the phone down, face down on the table, he said, "I took her off the household account, and the family emergency contact list at the office, and the foundation board." He looked at Meredith steadily. "If she had access to anything that touched you, I've started closing it, tonight." A tear moved down Meredith's face before she could stop it. She pressed the back of her hand to her cheek, fast and hard, almost angry at herself for it. Fletcher did not reach for her. He had learned something in the last 15 minutes that he couldn't unlearn. That she had flinched when Anthea stepped toward her, braced before the first word landed, and that reflex had a long history he was only beginning to understand. He would not add himself to the list of people whose movements she had to read in advance. "I failed you," he said, "not just tonight, for years." Meredith looked at the table. "When she corrected you at dinner, I called it her personality. When she questioned your work, I said she was from a different generation. When you looked at me from across the room and I knew exactly what you were asking." He stopped. "I called it keeping the peace, and I told myself you were strong enough to absorb what I was too afraid to stop." "I had to be strong," she said quietly. "You didn't leave me another option." The words were not cruel. They were completely simply true. And truth, Fletcher was learning, had a different weight than cruelty. It didn't want to wound you, it just refused to be put down. "I watched you change every year," he said. "Your smile got smaller, you stopped talking at his mother's dinners, you started positioning yourself near the door at family events, like you needed to know the exit. I noticed all of it and I told myself it was stress. I told myself you were adjusting." He shook his head. "I let myself believe comfortable stories because the true one required me to act." Meredith looked at the far wall. "On our wedding day," he said, "I stood in front of everyone we knew and promised to put you first. I didn't. I let my mother stand too close to our marriage and I called it family loyalty. I let her speak to you in ways no one had the right to speak to you, and I called it keeping the peace. And the peace I kept was only mine." He looked at his hands. "You were the one paying for it, every day. And when you disappeared I let myself believe the easiest story. That you'd run, that you were the one who'd broken us, because the true story meant looking at the way I'd left you exposed." Meredith's jaw tightened, her eyes stayed down. "You were the one being threatened," he said. "You were the one carrying our daughter alone. Counting dollars. Moving twice. Building evidence in a boarding house in East Van while I sat in board meetings telling people I was managing." He let out a breath that came from somewhere deep and unflattering. "You were managing, I was just surviving, feeling sorry for myself." "You didn't know," Meredith said, quiet, almost reluctant. "I should have." The answer came before he thought about it. "I should have known because you were my wife. I should have known because you looked at me from across rooms and I kept looking away. I chose the easier red every single time and I told myself it was maturity." He shook his head slowly. "It wasn't maturity, it was cowardice in a good suit." Meredith's mouth pressed together. Her hand moved over her belly. She breathed out slowly. "I kept waiting," she said after a long silence. "Not for a grand gesture, just for once, just one time. For you to choose me before there was a crisis, before it cost you something. Before I had to reach the point of breaking for it to be worth your attention." She paused. "I kept hoping you'd see it without me having to bleed in front of you first." Fletcher bowed his head. "You chose me when it was easy," she said, "when it felt romantic, when it made you look like a good husband in a room full of people watching. But when choosing me meant disappointing her." She stopped. He finished it for her. "I chose silence." She nodded. That small tired nod broke something in him far more completely than anger would have. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at her. "I built a company out of nothing. I have argued with regulators, with banks, with men who tried to cheat me out of contracts I'd earned. I have never backed down from a fight that mattered professionally." He paused. "And I let myself be afraid of my mother's disapproval inside my own home." Meredith looked at him. Something shifted in her face. Not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition. The particular expression of a person watching someone finally look at the right wound. "She knew that about you," Meredith said. "Yes," Fletcher said, "she did." A knock at the break room door. The charge nurse, professional and gentle. Dr. Anand was in the family consultation room at the end of the hall. She said whenever they were ready. Meredith moved to stand. Fletcher stood first, moved the chair back slowly with one foot and waited. She rose carefully, one hand braced on the table. He held out his arm, not grabbing, not guiding, just offering. Meredith looked at it. 7.5 months of reading rooms, reading people, deciding in seconds who was safe and who was performing safety. Her hand settled into the crook of his elbow, lightly. Like setting something fragile down on a surface she wasn't yet sure could hold it. He didn't close his grip. He simply moved with her, steady and slow, through the service corridor and back into the lit hallway. In the family consultation room, Dr. Anand was calm and warm, and asked his questions in the careful, unhurried way of someone who understood that medicine was sometimes the smallest part of what a patient needed. When he confirmed the baby was healthy, heart rate strong, position good, everything measuring correctly, Meredith closed her eyes. Her hands spread across her belly. Her shoulders dropped half an inch. Fletcher watched the relief move through her and understood what it meant. She had been carrying that fear alone for 7.5 months. She had not been able to ask anyone to carry it with her, because everyone who might have was connected to the thing she was running from. Later, in the back seat of the car, the city moving past the windows in wet amber light, that particular Vancouver rain that barely makes a sound, just softens everything, blurs the street lights at their edges, turns the whole city quiet. Meredith leaned her head against the glass and let her eyes close. Fletcher sat with space between them, his hands quiet in his lap. He had 7 months to account for and years of smaller silences before that. None of it could be undone in a hospital corridor or a break room or a car moving through a wet Tuesday night. He understood that now. Understood it the way you understand a load-bearing wall only after something has fallen. Not with surprise, but with a belated, humbling clarity. He would show up for the lawyer's appointment. He would sit in whatever chair Meredith told him to sit in, and be quiet, when she needed him to be quiet. He would stop every access his mother had built, every foothold she had carved over the years into a marriage he had left insufficiently guarded. He would do all of it without asking for credit, without making his effort the center of any room. It would not be enough at first. He knew that, but beginning was the only thing available to him tonight, and he would take it. After a while, Meredith's hand shifted on the seat between them, not reaching, just moving the way a hand does when the body is finally too tired to keep it still. Fletcher set his hand beside hers, not touching, just close enough that if she wanted to she could. She didn't pull away. The rain kept falling. The city kept moving. Somewhere in the weeks ahead there were lawyers' meetings, difficult conversations, a delivery room, a daughter who would arrive into whatever they managed to build between now and then. There was a great deal of work that had nothing romantic about it, and no guarantee at the end. But tonight there was this, 2 people in the back seat of a car, not yet whole, not yet sure, not yet anything except present. And for the first time in 7.5 months, neither of them was alone in it.